Welcome to the Mind Solution podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Hello and welcome to another podcast from the Mind Solution. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Tania Elfersy. And Tania works with women to enable them to transform their experience of menopause and perimenopause and experience symptoms of relief simply and naturally. So welcome and thank you so much for being with us today, Tania.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, Tania, I came across you because I saw the article that you'd written about your story of how you'd healed yourself from menopause symptoms in 3 days, which, was just incredible, absolutely incredible. And for anybody listening, we will share with you how Tania achieved that and how you can achieve that for yourselves towards the end. But the article that you wrote was very much off the back of the Channel 4 documentary in the UK called Sex, Myths and the Menopause. So before we get into that, I'd love to just find out a little bit more about your background and what inspired you to write the article that you did.
Yeah, well, I've been working with women during perimenopause and menopause for about 7 years now, helping them really experience this period of change a different way and helping them reach symptom relief. And I come from an approach where I really appreciate the innate intelligence within the body. And I understand the whole period of transformation in a very different way from the way it seems that a lot of the media are trying to create the story around this change as a time of massive symptoms and deterioration in terms of our health and a need for some level of pharmaceutical intervention. Otherwise, disease will just be inevitable. And this is the story that seems to be told, which is a sort of an old story that seems to be coming back in vogue. And my experience of this time of change is very different. And the experience of women that I help is very different. And I know that there can be a different experience of this time. So I saw the program on Channel 4 and was really shocked at how little there was in terms of time given to a more natural, holistic, tapping into the intelligence of the body approach, which really does work and does help women not only journey through the time of perimenopause and menopause much gentler and with fewer symptoms, but also sets us up for a very healthy journey post-menopause. So I was really interested to put out a different perspective because I felt that this program didn't do that. And this program then led to this incredible explosion of fear around menopause, which, well, fear is never healthy anyway. And but women were literally, posting on social media how upset they were because they hadn't been on HRT or hadn't been on it long enough. And surely this was going to be detrimental to their health. And I know that that's just not true. So I really wanted to share what I've seen and, a different perspective, which is much more hopeful. And I hope that gives women a better feeling about what they might be going through, which is a good start, but it'll be much more than that, obviously. Yeah,
absolutely. And picking up on what you said, you use the word story, and I really love that because if we think about the story of what women are almost kind of set up to expect when they transition through this next stage of their life. From the clients that you've worked with, and what have you seen that story looks like before they come to people like you?
Yeah, so it's just what we seem like everywhere we look, it seems to be you reach this time of midlife, your hormones start getting it wrong, your body starts malfunctioning, you're going to suffer from terrible symptoms, which you can maybe do some yoga, you can maybe try some meditation, but if you really want to get to the end of those symptoms, you really have to have a pharmaceutical intervention with HRT or bioidentical HRT. And on the back of that, there is this story of, and the menopause itself, which is, the change in hormonal, your hormonal patterns are going to create disease. So this is the story that we've been fed for decades, actually, and sometimes it's more in the fore and sometimes it's less. But this idea that the woman's body somehow gets it wrong. And I'm here to tell women that that's just a story. And the only reason that we're ever told why a woman's body gets it wrong and why her hormones start going crazy and why she needs a replacement, of hormones, is because women once never used to live as long as we do today. And if you look at the charts of average life expectancy over the ages, you can look back hundreds of years and you can say, okay, yes, once upon a time, the average life expectancy was around 40, and today it's, over 80. So surely, it's just this intervention of modern medicine that means that we're living longer, and that's the reason why our bodies are getting it wrong. Now, it's interesting, that argument is never used against men, it's only used against women, and the argument is actually a myth, because average life expectancy used to be really low because child mortality was really high. So 16th century England, for example, about 2/3 of kids never made it past the age of 16, and 1/3 of kids never made it past the age of 6. So that, when you put the averages together, that brings down the average life expectancy. But throughout history, and we can see it in literature, from the Bible, from Greek literature, from ancient Greece, from some references that we have from the 12th century, etc., we know that menopausal women, even though they weren't that really, they didn't like to write about them too much, just like they didn't like to write about women, generally, but they appear in the literature, and they do appear not as this crazy, one-off woman who happened to survive midlife. But no, menopausal women have always roamed this earth, and as long as humans have roamed this earth. So that really is made up, that we were never supposed to live this long. We've always been living this long, but our lives in modern societies, Western societies, let's say, are very different from what they used to be. And I think it would help us a lot more if we started looking at, well, perhaps our lifestyles and our behaviors, and again, looking at a more holistic picture of what we do in our life and how we show up in our life. Perhaps that has a bigger influence on how we transition through this very sensitive time, which is perimenopause and menopause.
Yes. And I also am curious, aside from just the symptoms, the relationship that women have with themselves and their identity as a woman when they hit this point, this next phase of their life, how they're also internalizing that. Because certainly from what I've observed and hundreds and hundreds of people that I've worked with one-to-one, a lot of that is the internalization that I'm kind of done with. Now I've hit menopause, that, I'm no longer of use. I'm a woman. I was only here as part of the procreation. And I see a really quite damaging relationship with a woman and her identity. Is that what you experience with your own clients, Tania?
Yeah, and again, it's part of the story of that really we can trace back to ancient times, when they would write quite specifically. They would say, well, what's the point of the woman living beyond her childbearing age, and does she then become more like a man? These were the discussions in ancient, amongst ancient Greek philosophers. And so if our identity is defined as only in terms of procreation, then once we move past that point, even though there are women who don't have children, so they have an identity in themselves. So of course, if we only put ourselves in that framework of we're here to procreate, then what's the point of moving past menopause? And even today, actually, there are some scientists who say, well, scientifically, does it make any sense? Does it make any sense that a woman should be living past menopause? And what's interesting is they've done some research among orca whales where there are postmenopausal whales, and they've seen that when there is a postmenopausal whale leading the pod, the whole pod does much better, because she is bringing in her wisdom of where to find food, conflict resolution, whatever orca whales need, and helping the whole pod get along. And she's able to do that because she doesn't have her own little offspring that she needs to take care of. And even if we look in the human experience, anyone who's had kids and they remember maybe they've got a few young kids, and then the grandma or the aunt or someone who doesn't have a baby attached to their boob walks in the room and has experience with childcare, what a relief that brings. So, but it's not only in the space of childcare, but we reach the age of midlife, and I truly believe that we're supposed to graduate to a management level. We're supposed to become an elder, not only for our own lives and our families, but for society as well. And we come with a lot of knowledge. Our brain actually starts working a bit differently. We have a better ability to view the whole picture. And in our society, we just don't have a recognition of that whatsoever. So of course, if society is telling you, well, you're quite useless, and if you really want to have any kind of value, you need to not change, right? You need to look the same, you need to still look sexy, you need to look how you did when you were 20s, you need to be wearing the same clothes as your teenage daughter. These are the messages that get pushed out, and there's no sense of, wait a minute, I'm going to sit on my throne with my crown, or however you want to imagine it, and I am going to transform, and I'm going to experience change. And I'm not going to be the same person I was in my 20s and 30s, but I'm going to step into the elder that I'm becoming. And I really think that the whole point of this sensitive time is to allow us to learn something about where good health lies, how we can live joyfully. And that is going to serve us post-menopause, but not only us, it will serve everyone around us. But we have to move through change to be able to see something new.
Yes. And as you say, it's that identity. I mean, we're all wrapped up in an identity, whether we're man, woman, teenagers, it doesn't matter, that identity of who we think we are, and the stories that we've been telling ourselves, stories that keep us stuck, keep us in this place where we don't think that we can change, that this is our fate, that we're told what to expect, particularly in the story of menopause, or you're gonna have really hot flushes, you're going to experience this, you're going to go through this. And it's almost kind of like we're being hypnotized in that nocebo effect of what to expect. So when we start experiencing change and symptoms, we're also telling ourselves this story of that nocebo effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I've seen that with the women that I work with. When they have an understanding of essentially what is the brilliance of our body, the intelligence that guides us throughout this period of change and always, and they have a respect for that, and they understand that this change is a natural part of our life cycle, and that we're moving on to a greater phase, we're graduating, right, in our evolution, in our own little lives. And they have a respect for that. If they've seen a reduction in symptoms, and then they're going through, let's say, a stressful time, and a symptom starts showing itself again, they have a completely different experience of the symptom. And because they understand that the symptom has come to guide them, right? The symptom doesn't exist beyond the intelligence which runs through the body. the symptom is the way for the body to speak to us. And so once, like I said, women begin to understand the body in an intelligent way, that the body is intelligent, then they can understand symptoms through that lens too. And so they don't start fearing symptoms, and they no longer need to buy into that story of, oh God, here comes a symptom. This is the malfunction. This is, going to ruin my weekend again. They view it in a bigger picture way. And they're like, well, what might be out of balance? What does my body want me to know right now? And they're able to have respect for the symptom. They don't panic from it. And then, surprise, surprise, the symptom, just sort of disappears much quicker than perhaps it would do in the past.
Yes. And actually that reminds me of what Eckhart Tolle speaks about when he talks about pain, and how our experience can be very different of pain when, as you say, we understand that intelligence, that infinite intelligence that is the creator of all things, including us. Picking up on what you said about stress and lifestyle, and how we're living very, very, very different lifestyles, which are very busy, we're very in our heads, we're very go, 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 rates of, it's a bit like Brené Brown talks about when she said we're the most addicted, obese, medicated, and in debt adult cohort that we've ever been. How are you seeing how we're living our lives impacting women and their experience of menopause?
Yeah. So I think it's easy for people who still like tied into the story of, but surely it's our hormones and surely, etc. If we understand perimenopause and menopause as a sensitive time, just like, and compare it to other sensitive times in our life. For example, when a woman is pregnant, if she starts working really hard and long hours and she's not sleeping enough and she's very, very stressed and she's not eating the right foods, her body is immediately going to start reacting. It's not going to, take years to do it. And there's a good reason for it that we know, because she needs to look after not only her own body, but the child that's growing inside of her. Now, if she goes to the doctor with symptoms, whatever they may be, the doctor will understand what's going on in that sort of framework. And the doctor will say to her, well, are you working too hard? Take some sick leave. Or, are you looking after yourself? Are you taking your vitamins? Or, so that the doctor doesn't then jump in and go, oh, well, that just must be your hormones, right? There must be something going wrong with your hormones. Your hormones are getting it wrong while you're pregnant. No, the doctor understands that pregnancy is a sensitive time, and thus will encourage the woman to look after herself. Now we come to midlife, which is another sensitive time. It's a time of hormonal change. It's a time when we're actually supposed to slow down, look within, understand something new about life. I think it's part of the design for the human race that we do that, in men too, by the way. And we start experiencing symptoms, etc. And then we say, oh, well, that's the hormones. That must be the hormones. Why? Because that's what we've been told. We sort of, we've bought into this story of a woman's hormones get it wrong. Well, what if it's not? What if it's just a sensitive time? So during a sensitive time, how can your body speak to you if your life is out of balance? Now, for some women, if, they've spent the last few years, sitting on the couch and eating, crisps, maybe it will be time to clean up a diet. Or if there's some women who just don't move and, move from home to the car, to the office, to the car, it may be time just to go for a walk. And the opposite as well. It may be, I speak to lots of women who were super fit, involved in marathons, triathlons, etc. And then they get to midlife and they're like, I can't do it anymore. I just want to go out for a walk. And I encourage them, listen to your body, because, if you were inspired to participate in triathlons, etc., that's fine. But if your body's now saying maybe that's not what's needed, then listen in to that. And for some women, it's a struggle because they're like, yeah, but I always used to be the fittest, and what's going to happen to my body, and what if I'm going to put on weight? And I'm like, well, play with it. But if your body starts, delivering symptoms, as it were, as messengers, it's a good idea to listen, and it's a good idea to ask, what does my body want me to know? And we can look at, is it diet, is it movement, is it stress? And so often, and especially in my work, it's number 3. Yeah, stress.
And it's really interesting what you say, that there might be women listening in that are, from a perceived health perspective, as you say, they might be doing, training for marathons, they might be doing their spinning class, they might be, eating quite a clean diet. But what they're not necessarily recognizing, and this is what I see from 10 years of working with people and organizations, is where is your focus of attention? Because you might be able to still run a marathon, but where's your focus in terms of your thinking? And if you're thinking stressful thoughts, if you're thinking anxious thoughts, if you're thinking, I can't cope, if you're thinking anything that you're thinking, our thinking is that contaminated thinking that creates our experience moment to moment to moment. If we don't have that awareness and understanding of the correlation between thinking and feeling, then you might look at things sort of without seeing the full picture, without seeing the full reality. Because you and I both know, Tania, that if we're thinking stressful thoughts or we're thinking anxious thoughts, and that's going to put the body in the stress response. And I think it was Dr. Joe Dispenza that said about 70% of people are living in the hormones of stress. And we know that stress is the survival response, the freeze, fight, flight response, which is great if you're in a moment of survival. But going through this change, your body cannot function in the way that it needs to support you through this if you're living in that stress response. Would you agree?
Yeah. And it seems that we've got so used to living with certain levels of stress that we don't pay any attention to it, because we think, well, that's okay. And okay, I'm not sleeping well. And okay, I've never got any time for anything else, but it's just the way it is. And never mind, and I'll get through it. And the thing is, perhaps a woman's body allowed her to do that in her 20s and 30s, but come to her 40s, the body is going to start speaking, because when the body goes through this sensitive time of change, it just doesn't have the tolerance for that level of stress, because that level of stress is creating chemical chaos in the body. And so the body's always having to compensate in different ways. And it's, although we can cope, and we're built to cope with levels of stress on a short-term basis, and, once a week or, every few days or whatever it is, we're not built to have that consistently running in the background in our head. And it's so useful when we can develop an awareness of how that stress is created, and we can develop awareness of the relationship that we can have with our thoughts, and how it's really, we have a choice that when stressful, what we would call stressful thoughts or not nice thoughts come in, we have a choice if we want to take them seriously or not. And realizing that it can be such a game changer, because we live through our life thinking, well, there's that thought running through my head, and I feel really bad, and so it must be true, and I need to work on that thought, and life is like this because it feels like this. And we don't realize, actually, let's try and understand how the system works. And from that understanding, we can have an awareness of what happens when we start taking our thinking seriously, and how we can actually not take it so seriously.
Yeah. You know what this really reminds me of is, so I've had 8 children, not literally, but certainly when I worked one-to-one with people, I've had a whole number of women that came for hypnotherapy because they wanted to get pregnant. and they had thoughts and beliefs, and we know that a belief is just a thought that you keep thinking, a belief about their ability to get pregnant, thoughts about their body, particularly maybe if they'd had a miscarriage, and their thoughts might be, well, what if it happens again? What if I can't carry a child? All of these, again, stories that they've bought into because of their experience and because of the emotion that those thoughts created. And some women that had been trying maybe to conceive a child, and again, that they were so in their head of, almost kind of in a state of desperation. And one of the first things that I always would do with these women was just to explain about, well, if you're in the stress response, your body doesn't know what's real and what's imagination. And if there was a threat to life, the body's going to take the energy and it's going to use it in the best way possible. So what we don't need in those moments of survival, well, we don't really need the immune system. We don't need to be fighting bugs and viruses if we're faced with a grizzly bear. We don't need our reproductive organs because we're not about to have sex if there's a threat to life. We don't need the digestive system. And when they start to get those insights, when they start to see for themselves, oh, maybe I don't need IVF. Maybe this was just an internally generated response that I was creating that was preventing me from getting pregnant. And we start to change that story around, teach them about the intelligence and wisdom of the body, resolve any trauma that might still be there if they've had some experiences of miscarriage, and boom, baby comes along. And it's the same as, when people say, they've maybe even gone through several rounds of IVF, and the minute they stop trying and stop stressing about having a baby, again, how many women conceive? Yeah. And it feels like that's exactly what I'm hearing that you say.
Yes. The body just wants to gently go through this transition phase. And if we are interfering with the way that it can do that through creating so often, it can be diet, it can be a lack of movement, but it's so often on the level of stress, then like you've just explained with women trying to get pregnant, the body's like thinking that there's an emergency situation that needs to be dealt with and it can't get on with the task at hand, or it tries to get on with the task at hand, but then it does it with interference because all the time it has to compensate for the stress that's going on. So but like I love what you said, because once we tune into the wisdom of the body, we can see it like completely differently and say, oh yeah, of course, if my body thinks I'm being chased by a bear, it doesn't want to get pregnant, right? Of course, that would be obvious. Of course, if it thinks that I'm not taking care of myself, it doesn't want to get pregnant, because where would the resources come from to look, to allow the baby to grow? So once we look at the body as an intelligent flow of energy that really never gets it wrong, and it's not stupid, it doesn't malfunction, it's always trying to bring us back into balance, but we misinterpret what that bringing back into balance looks like. And so, like I said, when the body's communicating with us through symptoms, and not being able to get pregnant is a symptom of something being not in balance in the body, just as all these symptoms that we can experience at midlife is something, a sign that something isn't in balance in the body. It's not inevitable, but it's something that's not in balance in the body. And we can say, oh, well, what's not in balance? What's the body trying to tell me? But if I accept that the body's intelligent, it changes the picture completely. And really, reaching symptom relief, or, allowing our body to work as it knows how to work, becomes so much easier.
Now, some people might be listening into this and thinking, but Sarah, Tania, I'm not being chased by a grizzly bear. It's not, unless I live in, Nova Scotia or somewhere. It's not kind of something that I experience on a day-to-day reality, but understanding the stress response, because even now, when I know certainly working with organizations, it's helping people to understand that we are looking outside of ourselves constantly and attributing the way that we feel to what it is that we think is creating that stress response. So many times I've heard, work-related stress, a presentation or a pitch that I've got to do to a client, the relationship that I've got with my boss, a one-to-one that I've just had with my team, my husband, any number of things, the email that I've just received, my flight's delayed. We're always looking outside of ourselves and thinking, well, this is a source of stress. Instead of that, as you say, that understanding where that stress response is being generated from, which is us.
Yeah.
And if we don't have that understanding, if we don't have that wisdom, we're always going to attribute that stress response to something else, which, thinking about the workplace, now we know that there are a lot of women that might be listening to this that are experiencing symptoms that are also showing up, they're doing their job. And I'm curious to know from your experience, Tania, what kind of impact the menopause and symptoms of the menopause are having on women in the workplace.
Yeah, well, I can quote some statistics from a Fawcett Society menopause survey that came out, and was actually some of the statistics were published in that Channel 4 program. And some that, really stood out for me was that 61% lost motivation at work during the menopause period for them, and 52% lost confidence at work. Now, I described already how we can have a different experience of our symptoms, and we can have a different experience of midlife change. But it's very easy to see how, if we buy into the story that we're, sold, or for whatever reason, that people tell us about the menopause in this negative way, and it's going to be packed with symptoms and it's going to be downhill from now on, we can just see how a woman sitting in the workplace, experiencing symptoms, feeling very stressed from it, feeling like this is going to go on for years and years, and there's no simple way out, and it's terrible, and no one understands me, and I've got no one to speak to, and feeling very alone. We can see how this could, lead to these kind of numbers of women losing confidence, losing motivation, etc. But the good news is it doesn't have to be this way. It really doesn't. And first of all, there is a move today for more awareness in the workplace about menopause, and I think that's a good thing. And I think it also needs to go beyond giving women the control of the heating or remote, air conditioning, because that could be a fix for some women.
But the answer.
I know some companies seem to feel that that's the answer, but it's not. And I would really encourage employers to listen to women, to ask them what they're experiencing, and how perhaps help and support could be offered. Because also the statistics show that lots of women would be really grateful for some support in the workplace. And just as you're offering support generally with the Mind Solution, for well-being in the workplace, this is an integral part of well-being, and it just has a different flavor. But actually, it's the same understanding that we can use no matter where a person is in their life, man, woman, other. It's just, we can bring an understanding into the workplace that's going to spread out and create well-being, and no matter what's going on with a woman's hormones. So there's hope there. Yeah.
And what crosses my mind when I think about women in the workplace, that women that are maybe in their 40s, early 50s, that are at maybe more of a senior level. And I can imagine from the work that I've done with people, there's potentially a level of fear of speaking out about this, just in the same way that there's a level of fear of speaking out about how we're feeling as a whole, whether you want to call that mental health or not, because we're scared of, if we put our hands up and say, I'm actually really struggling because I'm experiencing these symptoms. I can't really focus. I can't concentrate. My emotions are all over the place. The remote control isn't working for me. I'm not sleeping. I'm hot. The fear of the consequences of that, especially if they're in an organization where maybe at a cultural level, there's that fear that I'm going to be judged. I'm going to be seen differently. I'm not going to be seen as kind of like, on top of my game anymore. And what will happen if I speak out? So I think at a cultural level, there's, in the way that you work with women holistically, Tania, the whole thing around well-being, it has to be looked at holistically, including that culture, so that women do feel psychologically safe to speak out. They do feel safe to be vulnerable, because as you say, it's a sensitive time. We go through so many sensitive times. Even, gosh, I remember turning from a sort of from teenager to an adult, and it's a really sensitive time. But if we don't feel safe to be vulnerable, we feel like we have to protect ourselves, then I can imagine that that's a factor. But what I love about what we both teach about the wisdom and intelligence is that that applies to everything. And I think that would actually be a wonderful place for you to talk about how you alleviated all of your symptoms within 3 days.
Yeah. So I had been experiencing in my early 40s many symptoms that we attribute to perimenopause. And at first, I had no clue about perimenopause. Like many women, I entered my 40s. I thought menopause was something that happened at 51. For some reason, I thought it happened overnight, as if we developed from a girl to a teenager to a woman overnight. No, it takes time, but I never gave that too much thought. And so when I started experiencing symptoms, I just really felt like I was going a bit mad and falling apart. And so I was having night sweats and skin problems and frequent migraines. And the biggest thing was 2 weeks of PMS. My PMS used to be sort of perhaps one day, and then expanded on all levels, emotional, physical, to 2 weeks before the period. And so this was really not pleasant for me and others around me. But I had, at the beginning, like I said, I had no clue about perimenopause. And then I heard a webinar about many women in their 40s experiencing what the woman on the webinar, Dr. Christian Northrup, who's a leading light in women's health, she described as PMS on steroids. And I thought, well, that sounds like my life, PMS on steroids. And that was the first time that I'd heard about perimenopause, this period of change up to 10 years before the menopause. And I started exploring that more and more. And as you explore it more and more and try and work out, well, how can I fix the symptoms, you keep falling back on if you just really look at your hormones and try and fix them, you might be able to get some relief. But that didn't make sense to me, because I was already understanding, well, if my body had supported me all the way through, why would it suddenly go mad? Why wouldn't it suddenly be able to go through this period of change? And I came across an understanding called the 3 principles, and I started exploring that, and I started understanding something about thought, the nature of thought. And at the time where I was in my life, I had sort of set up my own business, and I had 3 young kids, and I was trying to juggle it all. And I was remembering my life in corporate when I felt top of my game, and I wasn't feeling on top of my game. And the big thought that used to come in for me was I'm not enough. That's how I felt. I felt not enough. I felt like I wasn't doing well in my little business. I wasn't doing well as a mother. And just that thought used to come in, and I used to feel really bad. And I used to feel really bad because I thought that was true. And of course, no one else was telling me I wasn't enough, but that was what I had created, a story that I had created and believed for myself. And then through understanding more about the nature of thought, I had an insight that was, well, if you didn't have, well, the time it was like, if you didn't have unresolved issues, you wouldn't have PMS. And actually I have a choice. Like, I'm creating these unresolved issues. I'm creating this storm around this idea that I'm not enough because I'm taking that thought seriously. But I could easily not take that thought seriously. And in fact, I saw, oh, actually, I think my life would be easier if I chose not to take that thought seriously. And in that moment, I thought, wow, that's something. I think I've cleared up my PMS, because, I thought that my PMS was all about not being too serious around this idea of I'm not enough. And what happened was, not only did my PMS clear up, but all my symptoms cleared up within days. So all my physical symptoms, and they stayed away. And I thought, well, at first I thought, well, that's just peculiar, and I kept waiting. Maybe they're going to come back, but no, they really did stay away, and they stayed away for about 9 months. And then there was something going on in my kids' school, and required my husband and I to try and start something up to create change. And there were lots of emails and lots of anger and lots of et cetera. And I started taking that situation very personally, about what the parents were doing and the teachers and the head teacher, et cetera. And slowly but surely, my symptoms started occurring again. And I thought, oh, well, I guess I didn't really see something. I guess it's not really something in the nature of thought. And then I had another insight about joy being my default. And people will maybe hear that and they're like, well, how could that possibly do anything? But for me, I really saw that it didn't actually matter what was going on outside. Like you were saying, we could blame our boss, we can blame the meeting, we can blame the email, we can blame all of these things. It didn't matter, because joy was my default. And it's all about default, actually. That's the way we're born. That's the way we are when we're little kids. We're just curious, and yeah, there can be times when we're uncomfortable and we need a nappy change, or we're hungry, or we need to go to sleep. But generally, that's our default experience of life, joyful and curious. And really seeing that again enabled all the symptoms to disappear once more. And then I really realized, oh yeah, there is something in this. And so that was 7 years ago. And to say that I've never had that thought of I'm not enough again, no, of course that thought can come into my head. And I don't need to be nervous about it coming into my head, because I don't control what thoughts come into my head. I can have all kinds of strange thoughts that come into my head. But these days, I have a very different relationship with them, because I know that it doesn't matter what thought comes into my head. I don't have to take it seriously. I don't have to believe that the feeling is telling me something that's true about the situation in front of me. The feeling is actually a divine guide, guiding me about where my thinking is in the moment. Am I in a low state of mind? Am I in a high state of mind? So when I'm in low thinking or insecure thinking, when I'm taking thoughts very seriously about, for example, not being enough, or it could be anything, then I can get caught up in the storm, and I can have the feelings come up. And the feelings actually are there to tell me, you're in stormy thinking, you can get out. You can start taking those thoughts a little less seriously, and then you'll have a different experience of whatever's going on. With experience, you remember that quicker. You don't ever get out of the human experience. I haven't, since 7 years ago, basically, or 7 years plus the 9 months that once, stressful time with this kid's school, sat in nirvana. No, I'm all the time living the human experience, but I remember how my experience is being created. It's being created through my relationship with thinking in the moment. And it's a life changer. So yeah, it seems very simple, and it seems like, well, how could that? But as I'm saying, it's really not our hormones. Our body absolutely knows how to go through midlife change. But if something is out of balance, and for me, it was really being stressed out by taking thoughts about myself seriously. My body was reacting, and it couldn't do things like, for example, with soap. If I went to a restaurant or something and I used the bathroom soap, it would, like, my whole hands would break out in terrible eczema. These days I can go to a restaurant, the soap it's no impact on me. And from the moment, from 7 years ago, soap hasn't had that impact on me. So like, well, that's weird. How did that happen? But because my body is not existing in stress, it can just detox the chemicals as it used to be able to do. And the same soaps don't have the impact that they used to have. Yeah.
It's just such a wonderful and inspiring and remarkable story, Tania. And it's you say it's simple, because actually when we understand the nature of thought, there is nothing else. And I love that we're both teachers of the 3 principles, because I know certainly, and we're just starting to introduce this into organizations, because for us, certainly at the Mind Solution, organizations are very much, we need tips, we need techniques, we need this, we need that. And now that's not to say that they can't be helpful, something like a breathing technique. Well, yeah, it can really help to remember how to breathe in a way that just calms down the central nervous system. But just to pick up on one thing to help our listeners, because sometimes people think about the nature of thought and they think, oh, well, maybe that means thinking. It's the way that I'm thinking. And when we talk about the nature of thought isn't about the content of your thinking. And I love the analogy that you used of a thought storm. That storm is just full of lots of it's like a storm, isn't it? There's thunder, there's lightning, there's all kinds of different things. So this isn't for women that might be listening thinking, I've just got to start thinking really positively. It's like, no. That's not what we're saying. And I'd love your thoughts. Here, we can't get away from this word now, can we? I'd love your insight, because to me, if I reflect on the nature of thought, my insight around that is it's energy. It's like electricity. It's like electricity, and we can plug any device into electricity, and we don't necessarily always know how electricity works, but I know that if I stick in my iPhone, my laptop, my anything, my hair straighteners, I'm gonna get a charge from that. So that's how I see the nature of thought, and the thinking is just a byproduct of that creative energy. But how do you see it, Tania?
Yeah. I also see sort of thoughts as little blips of energy that come into our head. And actually, when they come into our head, they're neutral. But it's when we start analyzing the content of them, or we decide we need to manage them, we need to be the gatekeeper, or what the frequency of thoughts could be, or something like that, then we have more and more thinking about our thoughts. But they can just exist. So it's almost like a rose bush, right? You can look at the roses and you can look at the thorns, and if you smell the roses, you're going to have a nice experience, which could be you interacting with thoughts that are, oh, I'm really looking to, forward to my holiday, or something like that. But if we start touching the thorns, we're going to have an experience of them that's painful, But if I don't touch them, I don't have that experience of them. So, like I said, I still have the "you're not enough" or any number of thoughts that we could, categorize as negative. But even though I'm saying that they're neutral when they come into my head, because I don't need to sit down and have a cup of tea with those thoughts, I don't need to engage with them. I don't need to be worried that they're coming into my head. I don't need to try and make sure they don't come into my head. My whole experience of life becomes lighter. And I am able to live more in the flow moment to moment because I'm not worried about the content of whatever is going through my head. Now, we have tens of thousands of thoughts that come through our head every day. And obviously we're not aware of most of them. But for some reason, we pick up on, some thorns and start touching them and wondering, well, why is it hurting me? It really doesn't matter what thoughts come into your head. You're not your thoughts. You're something much greater and divinely intelligent than that. So, yeah.
We do still, even though we both practice the three principles, I don't know about you, I do sometimes still get tripped up because of that thing called consciousness. that those thoughts come and seem like they're coming from something other than my thinking in the moment. And, again, there might be people listening in and going, yeah, but, Sarah, this situation at work, it's really making me angry. It's doing my head in. Surely I'm not creating that. And again, I love it when we deliver training and we help people understand where their experience is coming from in the moment. That, as you say, those thoughts, they drop in as little drops of energy, that thoughts themselves are completely neutral. It's then the meaning that we start applying to that. And so you start, you think that you're angry about a situation at work, and it's like, well, you're just thinking quite angry thoughts, and that's creating that chemical reaction in the body. But for me, thoughts are like the best special effects department going, because we believe that something else is happening, that there's a different reality. So it's so powerful. And you are proof of the pudding, Tanya, of how powerful these insights when we experience them and see the illusion for what it is, just what impact that can have, both on our state of mind, on our mental well-being, but also on the physiology of your body.
Yeah. And what I'd like to share is the compassion that we can have for us, whatever our understanding is. Because just like you said, I can have this understanding and I can still get caught up in a situation where, for example, I got 3 teenage kids at home. There could certainly be situations where I start taking things a bit serious, or they can start taking things a bit serious, and then I'm taking things serious. And then I remember, oh, I can have a different experience of this if I just wait. I don't need to try and sort it out from this state of mind that I'm in right now, thinking crisis, that I need to find the solution. No, I can just wait, and a different experience will arise from the space that I allow to appear between what's going on, teenage crisis, so-called, and my thinking about it. And the space, arises, and suddenly I'm having a different experience of it, and I can see things that perhaps I hadn't seen before. But for even if someone has an understanding or is beginning to see what we're saying, we're in this misunderstanding of where our experience is coming from innocently, right? We didn't try and bring this on ourselves. I certainly never, set out to start believing the thoughts of I'm not enough, right? It was innocent. It was an innocent misunderstanding. And so really, no matter where we are in our journey of perhaps becoming aware of our experiences or the nature of thought, etc., I love to share compassion, because we really don't have to, it's not something that we're taught. It's something that's going on in the background. It's the system working no matter what. But for whatever reason, we're really told that things work differently. And we're really told that if you're feeling stressed, then you need to try and work out how you're not going to be stressed. And so, that could be a technique, or that could be, analyzing all the thoughts, or that could be, spending 3 hours, writing down lists. And it's innocent because, we want to make ourselves feel better. That's all we want. But we're misunderstanding the way the system works. So again, like compassion for wherever we are on the journey. Yeah.
And I love that, because I see so many people, and certainly I put my hand up to this in the past, and still sometimes now and again today, of being really hard on ourselves and giving ourselves such a hard time, which, when we are really hard on ourselves, and especially thinking about the topic that we're here today to discuss around menopause, if I'm not handling this, if I've not got my body under control, again, that's just going to create a very stressful experience. And I know from myself on this journey, the more that I've seen where my experience is coming from, that, as you say, there's nothing to do. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to analyze it. I don't need to do anything, because the mind has that self-correcting system. And when we see and have those insights, it's like, and everything just settles itself back down. It's like a snow globe. We've shaken the snow globe, can't see anything that's inside. But when you have that insight, you see where your experience is coming from, the snow globe just calms itself down, and you can see that wisdom inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, that feels like a really gorgeous place to finish today, Tania. And thank you so much for such a wonderful, connected conversation that I trust brings hope and inspiration to everybody that's listening, everybody that shares this podcast. Remember that sharing is caring. So if you're listening to this and it's really resonating with you, then please do feel free to share it. If you're an organisation and you would really welcome some help around this subject, then do get in touch with us at www.themindsolution.com. But thank you so much, Tania, and to everybody that's listening. We look forward to joining you again soon. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.